Hello. Good evening, my sweetheart. It's me, Amber. We're back. Happy Wednesday. Oh, it sure feels nice to be back with you, my darlings, for another story reading stream. I hope I hope that everyone was able to have a nice and comfortable day. Or if you're just waking up, I hope that your day is going to be as wonderful as you are. Well, hello, Treat Note. Thank you for the follow. I'm happy to see you. And I'm super happy to see everyone in chat already here. My dear Bard, my sweet Dice. Oh, and my darling Olga. Welcome, welcome in. Rito, hello. Moogie. Moogie, you being cute over there with your squishmallows. Yeah. Well, come on in, everyone. The doors of the antiquity are open, and I'm super happy to have everyone here with me. Come sit in my lap if you'd like the extra comfort. But yes, we have another story reading stream this Wednesday, and last time we started a new collection of fairy tales. We went over the first five in a series of Dutch fairy tales. We read about the entangled mermaid, then about the boy who wanted more cheese. And after that, we learned about the princess with 20 petticoats. There was a little bit of a flooding disaster in The Cat and the Cradle, and the very last one, which I think was probably my favorite out of the five, was Prince Spinhead and Miss Snow White. That one was quite enchanting. I sure did enjoy it. And I hope you did too. Oh, you? A feast time? Of course, Moogie. For you? Absolutely, every time you're here, I will be more than happy to give you uppies. After all, you're always such a sweet and wonderful pupper. Now, how has everyone's day been so far? Please do tell me. Oh, it's the middle of the week, so we just have to persevere. There's only 2 more days until the weekend. I'm so tired. Oh, Bard. Bard. Come here, my sweet Bard. I'll hold on to you. I'll give you big warm hugs. What's got you so tired today? I'm surprised I'm not horribly exhausted. Because I feel like these recent days have just been working all of us extra hard. Goodness. Well, I was already tired, and then the thing happened. I said, ah, yes. Mm-mm-mm. Oh, the things just keep happening, and they keep going. But that's okay because now we're here together, and at least for a little while, things are going to be okay, and soft and gentle. And the only thing you really need to do for the next hour or two is close your eyes if you can, and relax your shoulders, let them drop a little lower, and listen to my voice as I read you Dutch fairy tales. Right. Should we get started? I think so. I will pin our usual message in chat. Pin message. There we go. There it lives. Oh, and what do we have ahead of ourselves tonight? Well, the first one that we're going to be reading is called The Boar with the Golden Bristles. And the second story is going to be The Ice King and his wonderful grandchild. I wonder if we'll be able to get through 4 or 5 today. Hmm, 4 for sure. And then I'll see how I'm feeling. If my voice can carry on with the fifth one. Then the third story is going to be The Elves and Their Antics. And the fourth one is called The Kabooters and the Bells. Now, I haven't seen these very well, so it will be a new adventure for me as much as it will be for you. So, without further ado, let's get into our story reading. And here I am at my favorite table with all of my comfy little sweethearts. Look at them go. And our first story for the night is called The Boar with the Golden Bristles. Get comfy, my darlings, because it goes a little bit like this. Long, long ago, there were brave fighters and skillful hunters in Holland, but neither men nor women ever dreamed that food was to be got out of the ground, but only from the trees and bushes, such as berries, acorns, and honey. They thought the crust of the earth was too hard to be broken up for seed, even if they knew what grain and bread were. They supposed that what nature provided in the forest was the only food for man. Besides this, they made their women do all the work and cook the acorns and brew the honey into mead, while they went out to fish and hunt and fight. So the fairies took pity on the cold northern people who lived where it rained and snowed a great deal. They held a council and agreed that it was time to send down to the earth an animal with tusks to tear up the ground. Then the people would see the riches of the earth and learn what soil was. They would be blessed with farms and gardens, barns and stalls, hay and grain, horses and cattle, wheat and barley, pigs and clover. Now, there were powerful fairies of a certain kind who lived in a happy land far, far away, who had charge of everything in the air and water. One of them was named Fro, who became lord of the summer sunshine and warm showers that make all things grow. It was in this bright region that the white elves lived. It was a pretty custom in fairyland that when a fairy baby cut its first tooth, the mother's friends should make the little one some pretty present. When Nerthus, the mother of the infant Fro, looked into its mouth and saw the little white thing that had come up through the baby's gums. She went in great glee and told the glad news to all the other fairies. It was a great event, and she tried to guess what present her wonderful boy baby should receive. There was one giant-like fairy as strong as a polar bear who agreed to get for little Fro a creature that could put his nose under the sod and root up the ground. In this way, he would show men what the earth just under its surface contained, without their going into mines and caverns. One day, this giant fairy heard two stout dwarfs talking loudly in the region under the earth. They were boasting as to which could beat the other at the fire and bellows, for both were blacksmiths. One was the king of the dwarfs, who made a bet that he could excel the other. So he set them to work as rivals, while a third dwarf worked the bellows. The dwarf king threw some gold in the flames to melt, but, fearing he might not win the bet, he went away to get other fairies to help him. He told the bellows dwarf to keep on pumping air on the fire, no matter what might happen to him. So when one giant fairy, in the form of a gadfly, flew at him and bit him in the hand, the bellows blower did not stop for the pain, but kept on until the fire roared loudly, as to make the cavern echo. Then all the gold melted and could be transformed. As soon as the dwarf king came back, the bellows blower took up the tongs and drew out of the fire a boar having golden bristles. This fire-born golden boar had the power of traveling through the air as swiftly as a streak of lightning. It was named Gullin, or Golden, and was given to the fairy Fro, and he, when grown, used the wonderful creature as his steed. All the other good fairies and the elves rejoiced, because men on the earth would now be helped to do great things. Even more wonderful to tell, this fire-born creature became the father of all the animals that have tusks and that roam in the woods. A tusk is a big tooth, of which the hardest and sharpest part grows, long and sharp, outside of the mouth, and it stays there even when the mouth is shut. When Gollin was not occupied or being ridden by Fro on his errands over the world, he taught his sons, that is, the wild boars of the forest, how to root up the ground and make it soft for things to grow in. Then his master Fro sent the sunbeams and the warm showers to make the turned up earth fruitful. To do this, the wild boars were given two long tusks, as pointed as needles and sharp as knives. With one sweep of his head, a boar could rip open a dog or a wolf, a bull or a bear, or furrow the earth like a plowshare. Now there were several cousins in the tusk family, the elephant on land, and the walrus and narwhal in the seas, but none of these could plow ground, but because the boar's tusks grew out as long as were so sharp and hooked at the end, it could tear open the earth's hard crust and root up the ground. This made a soil fit for tender plants to grow in, and even the wild flowers sprang up in them. All this, when they were first introduced, was very wonderful to human beings. The children called one to the other to come and see the unusual sight. The little troughs, made first by the ripping of the boar's tusks, were widened by rooting with their snouts. These were welcomed by the birds, for they hopped into the lines thus made to feed on the worms. So the birds, supposing that these little gutters in the ground were made especially for them, made great friends with the boars. They would even perch near by, or fly to their backs and ride on them. As for the many as for the many fathers, when they looked at the clods and the loose earth thus turned over, they found them to be very soft. So the women and girls were able to break them up with their sticks. Then the seeds dropped by the birds that came flying back every springtime from faraway lands sprouted. It was noticed that new kinds of plants grew up which had stalks. In the heads or ears of these were 100-fold more seeds. When the children tasted them, they found to their delight that the little grains were good to eat. They swallowed them whole, they roasted them at the fire, or they pounded them with stones. Then they baked the meal thus made, or made it into mush, eating it with honey. For the first time, people in the Dutch world had bread. When they added the honey brought by the bees, they had sweet cakes with mead. Then, saving the seeds over from one summer to another, they in the springtime planted them in the little trenches made by the animals' tusks. Then the Dutch words for boar and row were put together, meaning boar row, and there issued, in time, our word for row. The women were the first to become skillful in baking. In the beginning, they used hot stones on which to lay the lump of meal, or flour and water, or the batter. Then, having learned about yeast, which raised the flour, they made real bread and cakes, and baked them in the ovens, which the others had made. When they put a slice of meat between upper and lower layers of bread, they call it broodje, that is, little bread or sandwich. In time, instead of one kind of bread or cake, they had a dozen or 20 different sorts, besides griddle cakes and waffles. Now, when the wise men of the mark saw that the women did such wonderful things, they put their heads together and said one to the other, "We are quite ready to confess that fairies and elves and even the kabouters are smarter than we are. Our women also are certainly wonderful, but it will never do to let the boors think that they know more than we do. They did indeed teach us how to make furrows, and the birds brought us grain, but we are the greater, for we can hunt and kill the boars with our spears. Although they can tear up the ground and root in it with tusk and snout, they cannot make cakes as our women can. So let us see if we cannot beat both the boars and the birds, and even excel our own women." we shall be more like the fairies if we invent something that will outshine them all. So they thought and planned, and little by little they made the plough. First, with a sharp stick in their hands, the men scratched the surface of the ground into lines that were not very deep. Then they nailed plates of iron on those sticks. Next, they fixed this iron shod wood in a frame to be pulled forward, and by they added handles. Everyone, harnessed together, pulled the plough. Indeed, it was ages before they had oxen to do this heavy work for them. At least, it took a while until the perfect plough was seen. It had a knife in front to cut the clods, a coulter, a beam, a mould board and handles, and after a while, a wheel to keep it straight. Then they set horses to draw it. Fro the fairy was the owner not only of the boar with the golden bristles, but also of the lightning-like horse Sleipnir, that could ride through fire and water with the speed of light. Fro also owned the magic ship, which could navigate both land and sea. It was so very elastic that it could be stretched out to carry a host of warriors over the seas to war, or fold up like a lady's handkerchief. With this flying vessel, Fro was able to move about like a cloud and also to change like them. He could also appear or disappear as he pleased in one place or another. By and by, the wild boars were all hunted to extinction and disappeared. Yet, in one way, and a glorious one also, their name and frame were kept in men's memories. Brave knights had the boar's head painted on their shields and coats of arms. When the faith of the Prince of Peace made wars less frequent, the temples in honor of Fro were deserted, but the Yule log and the revels held to celebrate the passing of the Mother Night in December, that is, the longest one of the year, were changed for the Christmas festival. Then again, the memory of man's teacher of the plough was still kept green, for the boar was remembered as the giver not only of nourishing meat, but of ideas for men's brains, baked in the oven and made delightful to the appetite, served on the dish with its own savory odors, decorated with sprigs of rosemary. The boar's head was brought in for the great dinner, with the singing of Christmas carols. And that was the end of the first story. Mm. Hello, Aramir. Happy to see you drop in for a little bit. Of course, of course. If you need to head off, go on. We're just doing some story reading tonight. Oh, hello, Pulse. I'm happy to see you. Welcome in, welcome in. Tonight we have a special story reading stream, so I won't really be here to talk to chat. You can simply enjoy my voice as I read out these stories and relax and have a wonderful time here with me. I hope everyone in chat is nice, comfy, and staying hydrated. Exactly. Which reminds me, I should absolutely drink some tea. Yeah. Mm. Just chilling to the reading stream, though I'll be right back because I'm threatening to fall asleep and disadvantages. Well, Bard, honestly, I think it would entirely fulfill the purpose of my reading stream, wouldn't it? You know I don't mind all of my cuties falling asleep here. In fact, I would only bring a soft blanket to put out over your shoulders. Maybe give you a soft kiss on the top of your head to bring you sweet dreams. Hello, Docky. Welcome in, welcome in. Seems like you and Pulse know each other. That's very sweet. Come here, both of you. Get cozy. Oh, my day was quite alright. Did all my work, had a small nap, and now I'm happy to be here. And how's your day? Please, do feel free to tell me about anything you'd like in chat. I'll just get back to it after reading. It would fulfill the purpose of your stream, but it would not fulfill the purpose of my sleep diagnosis bullshit. Bart, good luck with that. I believe in you. It's going to go well. Remember, I just got Jean? Oh, yeah. Isn't that the new Genshin update that everyone has been playing recently? Oh, one day, one day maybe I'll get back to Genshin. But it might still take a little while. Good luck with all your wishes. Oh, but alright. I'll drink a little bit more water and then we can continue with the second fairy tale of tonight. Hmm. Alright. Now, get cozy, everyone, because the second fairy tale is called The Ice King and His Wonderful Grandchild. And it goes something like this. In the far off ages, all the lands of northern Europe were one, where the deep seas had not yet separated them. Then our forefathers thought the fairies were gods. They built temples in their honor and prayed to them. Then, in the place where is now the little town of Ulrum in Friesland, was the home of the spirit in the ice, Uller. That is what Ulrum means, the home of the good fairy Uller. Uller was the patron of boys and girls. They liked him because he invented skates and sleds and sleighs. He had charge of things in winter and enjoyed the cold. He delighted also in hunting. Dressed in thick furs, he loved to roam over the hills and through the forests, seeking out the wolf, the bear, the deer, and the aurochs. His bow and arrows were terrible, for they were very big, and he was a sure shot. Being the patron of archery, hunters always sought his favor. The yew tree was sacred to Uller. because the best bows were made from its wood. No one could cut down a yew tree without angering Uller. Nobody knew who Uller's father was, and if he knew himself, he did not care to tell anyone. He would not bestow many blessings upon mankind, yet thousands of people used to come to Ulrum every year to invoke his aid and ask him to send a heavy fall of snow to cover the ground. That meant good crops of food for the next year. The white snow, lying thick upon the ground, kept back the frost giants from biting the earth too hard. Because of deep winter snows, the ground was soft during the next summer, so the seeds sprouted more easily, and there was plenty to eat. When Uller traveled over the winter snow to go out on hunting trips, he strapped snowshoes on his feet. Because these were shaped like a warrior's shield, Uller was often called the shield god. His protection was especially invoked by men who fought duels with sword or spear, which were very common in early days, or by soldiers or hunters who wished to be very brave or had engaged in perilous ventures. Now, when Uller wanted a wife to marry him, he desired Skadi because she was a huntress and liked the things which he liked. So they never had a quarrel. She was very strong, fond of sports and of chasing the wild animals. She wore a short skirt which allowed freedom of motion to her limbs. Then she ranged over the hills and valleys with wonderful swiftness. So rapid were her movements that many people likened her to the cold mountain stream that leaps down from the high peaks and over the rocks, foaming and dashing to the lowlands. They gave the same name to both this fairy woman and the water, because they were so much alike. Indeed, Skadi was very lovely to look at. It was no wonder that many of the gods, fairies, and men fell in love with her. It is even said that she had several husbands before marrying Uller. When you look at her pictures, you will see that she was pretty as bright winter itself, when Jack Frost clothes the trees with white and makes the cheeks of the girls so rosy. She wore armor of shining steel, a silver helmet, short white skirts, and white fur leggings. Her snowshoes were of the hue of winter. Besides a glistening spear, she had a bow and sharp arrows. These were held in a silver quiver slung over her shoulders. Altogether, she looked like winter alive. She loved to live in the mountains and hear the thunders of cataracts, the crash of avalanches, the moaning of the winds in the pine forests. Even the howling of wolves was music in her ears. She was afraid of nothing. Now, from such a father and mother, one would expect wonderful children, yet very much like their parents. It turned out that the offspring of Uller and Skadi were all daughters. To them, one after another, were given the names meaning glacier, cold, snow, drift, snow whirl, and snow dust, the oldest being the biggest and hardiest. The others were in degree softer and more easily influenced by the sun and the wind. They all looked alike, so that some people called them the six white sisters. Yet they were all so great and powerful that many considered them giantesses. It was not possible for men to tame them, for they did very much as they pleased. No one could stop their doings or drive them away, except Woden, who was the god of the sun. Yet in winter, even he left off ruling the world and went away. During that time, that is, during 7 months, Uller took Woden's throne and governed the affairs of the world. When summer came, Uller went with his wife up to the North Pole, or they lived in a house on the top of the Alps. There they could hunt and roam on their snowshoes. To these cold places, which the whole family enjoyed, their daughters went also, and all were very happy so far above the earth. Things went on pleasantly in Uller's family so long as his daughters were young, for then the girls found enough to delight in at their daily play. But when grown up, and their heads began to be filled with notions about the young giants who paid visits to them, then the family troubles began. There was one young giant fairy named Vor, who came often to see all six of Uller's daughters, from the youngest to the oldest. Yet no one could tell which of them he was in love with, or could name the girl he liked best. No, not even the daughters themselves. His character and his qualities were not well known, for he put on many disguises and appeared in many places. It was believed, however, that he had already done a good deal of mischief and was likely to do more, for he loved destruction. Yet he often helped the Kabouter dwarves to do great things, so that showed he was of some use. In fact, he was the fire fairy. He kept on courting all the six sisters long after May Day came. Then he lengthened his visits until the heat turned the entire half-dozen of them into water. And so they became one. At this, Uller was so angry at Vers having delayed so long before popping the question, and at his daughters losing their shape, that he made Vor marry them all, and at once, they taking the name of Regin. Now, when the child of Vor and Regin was born, it turned out to be, in body and in character, just what people expected from such a father and mother. It was named in Dutch Stoom. It grew fast and soon showed that it was so powerful as its parents had been. Yet it was much worse when shut up than when allowed to go free in the air. Stoom loved to do all sorts of tricks. In the kitchen, it would make the iron kettle lid flop up and down with a lively noise. If it were confined in a vessel, whether of iron or earthenware, when set over the fire, it would blow the pot or kettle all to pieces in order to get out. Thinking itself a great singer, it would make a rather pleasant sound when its mother let it come out of a spout. Yet it never obeyed either of its parents. When they tried to shut up Stoom inside of anything, it always escaped with a terrible sound. In fact, nothing could long hold it in without an explosion. Sometimes Stoom would go down into the bowels of the earth and turn on a stream of water so as to meet the deep fires which are ever burning far down below us. Then there would come an awful earthquake, because Stoom wanted to get out, and the earth crust would not let him, but tried to hold him down. Sometimes Stoom slipped down into a volcano's mouth. Then the mountain, in order to save itself from being choked, had to spit Stoom out, and this always made a terrible mess on the ground, and men called it lava. Or Stoom had stayed down in the crater as a guest, and quietly come out occasionally in jets and puffs. Even when Jack Frost was around and froze the pipes in the house, or turned the water of the pots, pans, kettles, and bottles into solid ice, Stoom behaved very badly. If the frozen kettles or any other closed vessel were put over the stove or near the fire, and the ice melted at the bottom too fast, Stoom would blow the whole thing up. In this way, he often put men's lives in danger and made them lose their property. No one seemed to know how to handle this mischievous fairy. Not one man on earth could do anything with him, so they let him have his own way. Yet all the time, though he was enjoying his own tricks and lively fun, he was, with his own voice, calling on human beings to use him properly and harness him to wheels, for he was willing to be used to them, and was all ready to pull or drive, lift or lower, grind or pump, as he need might be. As long as men did not treat him properly and give him the right to get out into the air after he had done his work, Stoom would explode, blow up, and destroy everything. He could be made to sing, hiss, squeal, whistle, and make all kinds of sounds, but unless the bands that held him in were strong enough, or if Vor got too hot, or his mother would not give him drink enough when the iron pipes were red with heat, he would lose his temper and explode. He had no respect for bad or neglected boilers, or for lazy or careless firemen and engineers. Yet properly harnessed and treated well, and fed with the food such as his mother can give, and roused by his father's persuasion, Stoom is greater than any giant or fairy that ever was. He can drive a ship, a locomotive, a submarine, or an airplane, as fast as froze boar, horse, or ship. Everybody today is glad that Stoom is such a good servant and friend all over the world. And that's the end of the second story tonight. Oh, Pulse, thank you for the hydrate redeem. I will do that just now. Yeah, I have my lovely usual cup of black tea for the evening. Oh, I do enjoy that one, probably the most. Mm. Oh, thank you, Paolo, for your follow. I'm happy to see you here. Welcome. And thank you, Olga, for the head pat. You know how much I love them. They're my favorite. Oh, I'm about to work on my animation skills. So what would you like? Oh, Pulse. That sounds very lovely. Have you animated anything such as a hand opening a book and the pages flipping open? Or maybe someone opening the palm of their hand and a little blossom or a flower opening its petals in their grasp. Hmm. Or maybe that's just my imagination going a little wild. I never done that before, but it could be interesting. Oh, really? And what do you usually animate then? I suppose it must be quite a difficult process. No, I should probably also sit up properly. Make sure that my back doesn't end up hurting by the end of the stream. Mm. Oh, Rito, thank you so much for the stretch. I think I'll do just that. Oh, oh, Whew, much better. And thank you so much for the head pat. I do appreciate all of them. Just kind of getting back into it. I've done running cycles and a few emotes for friends. I see. You could also try having someone tuck a loose strand of hair behind their ear, or a soft smile and soft blinking of someone who's about to fall asleep. Oh, but maybe I'm the wrong one to ask for animation tips. I've never done something like that. You are the artist and the expert in this case. I'd love to see what you come up with. Stretches hit different. Rito, I'm just stretching. Uh, I know maybe it's a different sound effect, but you're gonna have to trust me. Oh, also, I wonder if I should have a page turning sound effect as I'm reading my books. Maybe like this. Oh, but I don't think my mic would pick it up. So, everyone, get nice and cozy because we're gonna continue. Uh, 1 second. I'm back. Just had to take care of something really quick. Oh no, I believe you. It's just when you look away, start to write up stuff for work and hear that. Well, Rito, you were the one who redeemed the stretch, and you are the one who's going to have to enjoy it. Maybe as much as I do, because I know that my back needs it. Oh, I'm really worried that my old chair is going to fall apart any moment now. I feel like you can really hear it creaking. I just take care of my friends, okay? Of course you do, darling. And I appreciate it very much. Oh, Moogie. Moogie, you baby. Thank you for that pat. I love it. Now, let's do another story. This one is called The Elves and Their Antics. The elves are the little white creatures that live between heaven and earth. They are not in the clouds, nor down in the caves and mines like the kabouters. They are bright and fair, dwelling in the air and in the world of light. The direct heat of the sun is usually too much for them, so they are not often seen during the day, except towards sunset. They love the silvery moonlight. There used to be many folks who thought they had seen the beautiful creatures, full of fun and joy, dancing hand in hand in a circle. In these old days, long since gone by, there were more people than there are now who were sure they had many times enjoyed the sight of the elves. Some places in Holland show by their names where this kind of fairies used to live. These little creatures that looked as thin as gauze were very lively and mischievous, though they often helped honest and hard-working people in their tasks, as we shall see. But first, and most of all, they were fond of fun. They loved to vex cross people and to please those who were bonny and light. They hated misers, but they loved the kind and generous. These little folks usually took their pleasure in the grassy meadows, among the flowers and butterflies. On bright nights, they played among the moonbeams. There were certain times when the elves were busy, in such a way as to make men and girls think about them. Then their tricks were generally in the stable or in the field among the cows, sometimes in the kitchen or dairy, among the dishes or milk pans. They made an awful mess for the maids to clean up. They tumbled over the churns, upset the milk jugs, and played hoops with the round cheeses. In the bedroom, they made things look as if the pigs had run them over. When a farmer found his horse's mane twisted into knots, or two cows with their tails tied together, he said at once, "That's the work of elves." If the mares did not feel well or looked untidy, their owners were sure the elves had taken the animals out and had been riding them all night. If a cow was sick or fell down on the grass, it was believed that the elves had shot an arrow into its body. The inquest held on many a dead calf where its mother was that it died from an elf shot. They were so sure of this that even when a stone arrowhead, such as our far off ancestor used in hunting when they were cavemen, was picked up off the ground, it was called an elf bolt or elf arrow. Near a certain village named Elfberg or Elfhill, because there were so many of the little people in that neighborhood, there was one very old elf named Stiff, because though so old, he stood up straight as a lance. Even more than the young elves, he was famous for his pranks. Sometimes he was nicknamed Hanicam or Rooster's Comb. He got this name because he loved to mock the roosters when they crowed early in the morning. With his red cap on, he did look like a rooster. Sometimes he fooled the hens that heard him crowing. Old Stiff loved nothing better than to go to a house where was a party indoors. All the wooden shoes of the 20 or 30 people within, men and women, girls and boys, would be left outside the door. All good Dutch folks step out of their heavy timber shoes or klomps before they enter a house. It is always a curious sight at a country church or gathering of people at a party to see the klomps, big and little, belonging to baby boys and girls and to the big men who wear a number 13 shoe of wood. One wonders how each one of the owners knows his own, but he does. Each pair is put in its own place, but Old Stiff would come and mix them all up together and then leave them in a pile. So when the people came out to go home, they had a terrible time in finding and sorting out their shoes. Often they scolded each other, or some innocent boy was blamed for the mischief. Some did not find out till the next day that they had on one foot their own and on another foot their neighbor's shoe. It usually took a week to get the clumps sorted out, exchanged, and the proper feet into the right shoes. In this way, which was a special trick with him, this naughty elf Stiff spoiled the temper of many people. Beside the meadow elves, there were other kinds in Elfinland, some living in the woods, some in the sand dunes, but those called Stalkars, or elves of the stall, were Old Stiff's particular friends. These lived in stables and among the cows. The moss maidens that could do anything with leaves, even turning them into money, helped Stiff, for they too liked mischief. They teased menfolks and enjoyed nothing better than misleading the stupid fellows that fuddled their brains with too much liquor. Stiff's especially famous trick was played on misers. It was this: when he heard of any old fellow who wanted to save the cost of candles, he would get a kabouter to lead him off in the swamps where the sooty elves come out on dark nights to dance. Hoping to catch these lights and use them for candles, the mean fellow would find himself in a swamp full of water and chilled to the marrow. Then the kabouters would laugh loudly. Old Stiff had the most fun with another stingy fellow who always scolded children when he found them spending a penny. If he saw a girl buying flowers or a boy giving a copper coin for a waffle, he talked roughly to them for wasting money. Meeting this miser one day as he was walking along the brick road leading from the village, Stiff offered to pay the old man 1,000 guilders in exchange for 4 striped tulips that grew in his garden. The miser, thinking it real silver, eagerly took the money and put it away in his iron strong box. The next night when he went, as he did 3 times a week, to count and feel and rub and gloat over his cash, there was nothing but leaves in a round form. These, at his touch, crumbled to pieces. The moss maidens laughed uproariously when the mean old fellow was mad about it. But let no one suppose that the elves, because they were smarter than human beings, were always in mischief. No, no, they did indeed have far more intelligence than dull grown folks, lazy boys, or careless girls, but many good things they did. They sewed shoes for poor cobblers when they were sick, and made clothes for children when the mother was tired. When they were around, the butter came quick in the churn. When the blue flower of the flax bloomed in Holland, the earth in springtime seemed like the sky. Old Stiff then saw his opportunity to do a good thing. Men thought it a great affair to have even coarse linen tow for clothes. No longer need they hunt the wolf and deer in the forest for their garments. By degrees, they learned to make finer stuff, both linen for clothes and sails for ships, and this fabric they spread out on the grass until the cloth was well bleached. When taken up, it was white as the summer clouds that sailed in the blue sky. All the world admired the product, and soon the word Holland was less the name of a country than of a dainty fabric so snow white that it was fit to robe a queen. The world wanted more and more of it, and the Dutch linen weaver grew rich. Yet still there was more to come. Now, on one moonlit night in summer, the lady elves, beautiful creatures, dressed in gauze and film, with wings to fly and with feet that made no sound, came down into the meadows for their fairy dances. But when, instead of green grass, they saw a white landscape, they wondered, was it winter? Surely not, for the air was warm. No one shivered or was cold. Yet there were whole acres as white as snow, while all the old fairy rings, grass, and flowers were hidden. They found that the meadows had become bleaching grounds, so that the cows had to go elsewhere to get their dinner, and that this white area was all linen. However, they quickly got over their surprise, for elves are very quick to notice things. But now that men had stolen a march on them, they asked whether, after all, these human beings had more intelligence than elves. None of these fairies but believed that men and women were the inferiors of elves. So, then and there, began a battle of wits. They have spoiled our dancing floor with their new invention, so we shall have to find another, said the elfin queen who led the party. They are very proud of their linen, these men are, but without the spider to teach them, what could they have done? Even a wild boar can instruct these human beings. Let us show them that we also can do even more. I'll get old Stiff to put on his thinking cap. He'll add something new that will make them prouder yet. But we shall get the glory of it, the elves shouted in chorus. Then they left off talking and began their dances, floating in the air until they looked from a distance like a wreath of stars. The next day, a procession of lovely elf maidens and mothers waited on Stiff and asked him to devise something that would excel the invention of linen, which, after all, men had learned from the spider. Yes, and they would not have any grain fields if they had not learned from the wild boar, added the elf queen. Old Stiff answered yes at once to their request, and put on his red thinking cap. Then some of the girl elves giggled, for they saw that he did really look like a rooster's comb. No wonder they called him Hanicam, said one elf girl to the other. Now old Stiff enjoyed fooling just for the fun of it, and he taught all the younger elves that those who did the most work with their hands and head would have the most fun when they were old. First of all, he went at once to see Fro, the spirit of the golden sunshine and the warm summer showers, who owned two of the most wonderful things in the world. One was his sword, which as soon as it was drawn out of its sheath against wicked enemies, fought of its own accord and won every battle. Fro's chief enemies were the frost giants, who wilted the flowers and blasted the plants useful to man. Fro was absent when Stiff came, but his wife promised he would come the next day, which he did. He was happy to meet all the elves and fairies, and they, in turn, joyfully did whatever he told them. Fro knew all the secrets of the grain fields, for he could see what was in every kernel of both the stalks and the ripe ears. He arrived in a golden chariot, drawn by his wild boar, which served him instead of a horse. Both chariot and boar drove over the tops of the ears of wheat, and faster than the wind. The boar was named Gullin, or Golden Bristles, because of its sunshiny color and splendor. In this chariot, Fro had specimens of all the grains, fruits, and vegetables known to man, from which Stiff could choose, for these he was accustomed to scatter over the earth. When Stiff told him just what he wanted to do, Fro picked out a sheaf of wheat and whispered a secret in his ear. Then he drove away in a burst of golden glory, which dazzled even the elves that loved the bright sunshine. These elves were always glad to see the golden chariot coming or passing by. Stiff also summoned to his aid the kabouters, and from these little fellows got some useful hints. For they, dwelling in the dark caverns, know many secrets which men used to name alchemy, and which they now call chemistry. Then Stiff fenced himself off from all intruders on the top of a bright, sunny hilltop, with his thinking cap on, and made experiments for 7 days. No elves, except his servants, were allowed to see him. At the end of a week, still keeping his secret, and having instructed a dozen or so of the elf girls in his new art, he invited all the elves in the Low Countries to come to a great exhibition which he intended to give. What a funny show it was! On one long bench were half a dozen washtubs, and on a table nearby were a dozen more washtubs, and on a longer table not far away were 6 ironing boards with smoothing irons. A stove made hot with a peat fire was to heat the irons. Behind the tubs and tables stood the 12 elf maidens, all arrayed in shining white garments and caps, as spotless as snow. One might almost think they were white elves of the meadow, and not kabouters of the mines. The wonder was that their linen clothes were not only as dainty as stars, but that they glistened as if they had laid on the ground during a hoar-frost. Yet it was still warm summer, nothing had frozen or melted, and the rosy-faced elf maidens were as dry as an ivory fan. Yet they resembled the lilies of the garden when pearly with dewdrops. When all were gathered together, old Stiff called for some of the company who had come from afar to take off their dusty and travel-stained linen garments and give them to him. These were passed over to the trained girls waiting to receive them. In a jiffy, they were washed, wrung out, rinsed, and dried. It was noticed that those elf maidens who were standing at the last tub were intently expecting to do something great, while those 5 elf maids at the table took off the hot irons from the stove. They touched the bottom of the flat irons with a drop of water to see if it rolled off hissing. They kept their eyes fixed on Stiff, who now came forward before all and said in a loud voice, "Elves and fairies, moss maidens and stool sprites, one and all, behold our invention, which our great friend Fro and our no less helpful friends the kabooters have helped me to produce. Now watch me prove its virtues." Forthwith he produced before all a glistening substance, partly in powder and partly in square lumps as white as chalk. He easily broke up a handful under his fingers and flung it into the 5th tub, which had hot water in it. After dipping the washed garments in the white gummy mass, he took them up, wrung them out, dried them with his breath, and then handed them to the elf ironers. In a few moments, these held up before the company what a few minutes before had been only dusty and stained clothes. Now they were white and resplendent. No fuller's earth could have bleached them thus, nor added so glistening a surface. It was starch, a new thing for clothes. The fairies, one and all, clapped their hands in delight. "What shall we name it?" modestly asked Stiff of the oldest gnome present. "Hereafter we shall call you Stiff Stark." They all laughed. Very quickly did the Dutch folks, men and women, hear and make use of the elves' invention. Their linen closets now looked like piles of snow. All over the Low Countries, women made caps in new fashion of lace and plain linen, with horns and wings, flaps and crimps, with quilling and whirling. Soon, in every town, one could read the sign, "Here we do ironing." In time, kings and queens and nobles made huge ruffs, often so big that their necks were invisible, and their heads nearly lost from sight in rings of quilled linen or of lace that stuck out a foot or so. Worldly people dyed their starch yellow, zealous folk made it blue, but moderate people kept it snowy white. Starch added money and riches to the nation. Kings' treasuries became fat with money gained by taxes laid on ruffs, and on the cargoes of starch, which was now imported by the shipload or made on the spot in many countries. So, out of the ancient grain came a new spirit that worked for sweetness and beauty, cleanliness and health. From a useful substance as old as Egypt was born a fine art that added to the sum of the world's wealth and pleasure. And that, my darlings, was the end of the story. Oh, I'm eating and working on things, so I'm lurking. Of course, Moogie. Best of luck with your work. I hope it all goes well for you. And thank you very much, stupid Aminal, for being a customer here. I'm happy to have you. Oh, hello, Simo. Hi, hi. Yes, do enjoy your experience here with us. I hope my voice will ease your mind and put you to sleep because that's exactly why we're here. Must say getting tired, so resting soon. Exactly. Take it easy and make sure to be good to yourself. After all, you certainly deserve it, especially now. If I remember correctly, that your classes have started. I know that must be a very exhausting thing to be going through. Thank you for existing. Oh, Paul, no. Thank you for being here with me. After all, what would my voice matter if there was no one to hear it? I will most certainly pour myself another big glass of water. I can only encourage you to do the same, my darlings. Hmm. How many stories did we go through already? Was it three? I think so. I think we managed three so far. Oh, all of them seem to be about some aspect of agriculture, or at least in a way, talk about how people came about new inventions, either from the fairies or the elves, or were gifted these new things in one way or another. I think it can be quite lovely hearing about these things, which seem so normal and so mundane to us in everyday life, and giving them just a little bit of a fairy tale twist. Hmm. Well, I hope everyone is going to be extra cozy for the next one, because I think we can carry on with our story reading. Our next story is called The Kabouters and the Bells, and it goes something like this. When the young queen Wilhelmina visited Brabant and Limburg, they amused her with pageants and plays in which the little fellows, called kabouters in Dutch and kobolds in German, played and showed off their tricks. Other folk, named gnomes, took part in the tableau. The kabouters are the dark elves who live in forests and mines. The white elves live in the open fields and the sunshine. The gnomes do the thinking, but the kabouters carry out the work of mining and gathering the precious stones and minerals. They are short, thick fellows, very strong, and are strenuous in digging out coal and iron, copper and gold. When they were first made, they were so hideous that they had to live where they could not be seen, that is, in the dark places. The grown imps look like old men with beards, but no one ever heard of a kabouter that was taller than a yardstick. As for their babies, they're hardly bigger than a man's thumb. The big boys and girls in the kabouter kingdom are not much over a foot high. What is peculiar about them all is that they help the good and wise people to do things better, but they love to plague and punish the dull folks that are stupid or foolish or naughty. In impish glee, they lure the blockheads, or in Dutch, the cheeseheads, to do worse. A long time ago, there were no church spires or bells in the land of the Dutch folk, as there are now by the thousands. The good teachers from the south came into the country and taught the people to have better manners, finer clothes, and more wholesome food. They also persuaded them to forget their cruel gods and habits of revenge. They told of the Father in heaven who loved them all as his children and forgives them when they repent of their evil doings. Now, when the chief gnomes and kabouters heard of the newcomers in the land, they held a meeting and said one to the other, "We shall help all the teachers that are good and kind, but we shall plague and punish the rough fellows among them." So word was sent to all little people in the mines and hills, instructing them how they were to act and what they were to do. Some of the new teachers, who were foreigners and did not know the customs of the country, were very rude and rough. Every day they hurt the feelings of the people. With their axes they cut down the sacred trees. They laughed scornfully at the holy wells and springs of water. They reviled the people when they prayed to great Woden with his black ravens that told him everything, or to the gentle Freya with her white doves who helped good girls to get kind husbands. They scolded the children at play, and this made their fathers and mothers feel miserable. This is the reason why so many people were angry and sullen, and would not listen to the foreign teachers. Worse than this, many troubles came to the outsiders. Their bread was sour when they took it out of the oven. So was the milk in the pans. Sometimes they found their beds turned upside down. Gravel stones rattled down into their fireplaces. Their hats and shoes were missing. In fact, they had a terrible time generally and wanted to go back home. When the kabooters have a grudge against anyone, they know how to plague him. But the teachers that were wise and gentle had no trouble. They persuaded the people with kind words, and just as a baby learns to eat other food at the table, so the people were weaned away from cruel customs and foolish beliefs. Many of the land's folk came to listen to the teachers and helped them gladly to build temples. More wonderful than this were the good things that came to these kind teachers. They knew not how. Their bread and milk were always sweet and in plenty. They found their beds made up and their clothes kept clean, gardens planted with blooming flowers, and much hard work done for them. When they would build a church in a village, they wondered how it was that the wood and the nails, the iron necessary to brace the beams, and the copper and brass for the sacred vessels came so easily and in plenty. When, on some nights, they wondered where they would get food to eat, they found, on waking up in the morning, that there was always something good ready for them. Thus, many houses of worship were built, and the more numerous were the churches, the more did farms, cows, grain fields, and happy people multiply. Now, when the gnomes and kabooters, who like to do work for pleasant people, heard that the good teachers wanted church bells to call the people to worship, they resolved to help the strangers. They would make not only a bell or a chime, but actually a carillon, or concert of bells to hang up in the air. The dark dwarfs did not like to dig metal for swords or spears, or what would hurt people, but the church bells would guide travelers in the forest and quiet the storms that destroyed houses and upset boats and killed or drowned people, besides inviting the people to come and pray and sing. They knew that the good teachers were poor and could not buy bells in France or Italy. Even if they had money, they could not get them through the thick forests or over the stormy seas, for they were too heavy. When all the kabooters were told of this, they came together to work night and day in the mines. With pick and shovel, crowbar and chisel, and hammer and mallet, they broke up the rocks containing copper and tin. Then they built great roaring fires to smelt the ore into ingots. They would show the teachers that the Dutch kabouters could make bells as well as the men in the lands of the south. These dwarfish people are jealous of men and very proud of what they can do. It was the funniest sight to see these short-legged fellows with tiny coats coming just below their thighs and little red caps looking like a stocking and ending in a tassel on their heads, and in shoes that had no laces but very long points. They flew around as lively as monkeys, and when the fire was hot, they threw off everything and worked much harder and longer than men do. Were they like other fairies? Well, hardly. One must put away all his usual thoughts when he thinks of kabouters. No filmy wings on their backs, no pretty clothes or gauzy garments or stars or crowns or wands. Instead of these were hammers, pickaxes, and chisels. But how diligent, useful, and lively these little folks in plain coarse coats and with bare legs were! In place of things light, clean, and easy, the kabouters had furnaces, crucibles, and fires of coal and wood. Sometimes they were grimy, with smoke and coal dust, and the sweat ran down their faces and bodies. Yet there was always plenty of water in the mines, and when hard work was over, they washed and looked plain but tidy. Besides their stores of gold and silver and precious stones, which they kept ready to give to good people, they had tools with which to tease or tantalize cruel, mean, or lazy folks. Now, when the kabouter men began the roaring fires for the making of the bells, the little mothers and the small fry in the kabouter world could not afford to be idle. One and all they came down from off the earth, and into the mines they went in a crowd. They left off teasing milkmaids, tangling skeins of flax, tearing fishermen's nets, tying knots in cows' tails, tumbling pots, pans, and dishes in the kitchen, or hiding hats, and throwing stones down the chimneys onto the fireplaces. They even ceased their fun of mocking children, who were calling the cows home, by hiding behind the rocks and shouting to them. Instead of these tricks, they saved their breath to blow the fires into a blast. Everyone wondered where the kabouters were, for on the farms and in town nothing happened, and all was as quiet as when a baby is asleep. For days and weeks underground, the dwarfs toiled until their skins, already dark, became as sooty as the rafters in the houses of our ancestors. Finally, when all the labor was over, the chief gnomes were invited down into the mines to inspect the work. And what a sight! There were at least 100 bells of all sizes, like as in a family where there are father, mother, grown-ups, young sons and daughters, little folk and babies, whether single, twins, or triplets. Big bells that could scarcely be put inside a hogshead, bells that would go into a barrel, bells that filled a bushel, and others a peck, stood in rows. From the middle, and tapering down the row, were scores more, some of them larger than cowbells. Others at the end were so small that one had to think of pint and gill measures. Besides all these, there were stacks of iron rods and bars, bolts, nuts, and screws, and wires and yokes on which to hang the bells. One party of the strongest of the kabooters had been busy in the forest, close to a village, where some men, ordered to do so by a foreign teacher, had begun to cut down some of the finest and most sacred of the grand old trees. They had left their tools in the woods, but the kabooters at night seized their axes, and before morning, without making any noise, they had levelled all but the holy trees. Those they spared. Then the timber, all cut and squared, ready to hold the bells, was brought to the mouth of the mine. Now in Dutch, the name for bell is clock. So a wise and grey-bearded gnome was chosen by the high-sounding title of the Glockenspieler, or bell player, to test the bells for a carillon. They were all hung for practice on the big trestles in a long row. Each one of these frames was called a hang, for they were just like those on which fishermen's nets were laid to dry and been mended. So, when all were ready, washed, and in their clean clothes, even one of the kabooter families, fathers, mothers, and young ones, were ranged in lines and made to sing. The heavy male tenors and baritones, the female sopranos and contra altos, the trebles of the little folks, and the squeaks of the very small children, down to the babies cooing, were all heard by the gnomes, who were judges. The high and mighty Glockenspieler, or master of the carillon, chose those voices with best tone and quality, from which to set in order and regulate the bells. It was pitiful to see how mad and jealous some of the kabooters were when they were not appointed to the first row, in which were some of the biggest of the men and some of the plumpest of the women. Then the line tapered off to 40 or 50 young folks, including urchins, down to mere babies that could hardly stand. These had bibs on and had to be held up by their fond mothers. Each one by itself could squeal, coo, and crow as much as it liked, but at a distance their voices blended, and the noise they made sounded like a tinkle. All being ready, the old gnome bit his tuning fork, hummed a moment, and then started a tune. Along the line, at a signal from the chief gnome, they started a tune. In the long line there were, at first, booms and pedals, twanging and clanging, jangling and wrangling, making such a clangor that it sounded more like an uproar than an opera. The chief gnome was almost discouraged. But neither a gnome nor a kabooter ever gives up. The master of the choir tried again and again. He scolded one old father for singing too low. He frowned at a stalwart young fellow who tried to drown out all the rest with his bull-like bellow. He frowned and shook his finger at a kabooter girl that was flirting with a handsome lad near her. He cheered up the little folks encouraging them to hold up their voices until finally he had all in order. Then they practiced until the master gnome thought he had his scale of notation perfect and gave order to attune the bells. To the delight of all the gnomes, kabooters, and elves that had been invited to the concert, the rows of bells, 100 or more, from boomers to tinklers, made harmony. Strung one above the other, they could render merriment or sadness in solos, peals, chimes, cascades, and carillons, with sweetness and effect. At the low notes, the babies called out "Cow, cow," but at the high notes, "Bird, bird." So it happened that, on the very day that the bishop had his great church built, with a splendid bulb spire at the top, and all nicely furnished within, but without one bell to ring in it, that the kabooters planned a great surprise. It was night. The bishop was packing his saddlebags, ready to take a journey on horseback to Rheims. At this city, the great caravans from India and China ended, bringing to the annual fair rugs, spices, gems, and other things, and the merchants of Rheims rolled in gold. Here the bishop would beg the money or ask for a bell or chimes. Suddenly, in the night, while in his own house, there rang out music in the air, such as the bishop had never heard in Holland or in any of the 17 provinces of the Netherlands. Not even in the old lands, France or Spain or Italy, where the Christian teachers, builders, and singers, and the music of the bells had long been heard, had such a flood of sweet sounds ever fallen on human ears. Here, in the northern regions, rang out not a solo, not a peal, nor a chime, nor even a cascade from one bell or from many bells, but a long program of richest music in the air, something which no other country, however rich or old, possessed. It was a carillon, that is, a continued mass of real music, in which whole tunes, songs, and elaborate pieces of such length, mass, and harmony as only a choir of many voices, a band of music, or an orchestra of many performers could produce. To get this grand work of hanging in the spire done in one night, and before daylight also, required a whole regiment of fairy toilers, who must work like bees. For if one ray of sunshine struck any one of the kabooters, he was at once petrified. The light elves lived in the sunshine and thrived on it, but for dark elves like the kabooters, whose home was underground, sunbeams were as poisoned arrows bringing sure death, for by these they were turned into stone. Happily, the task was finished before the eastern sky grew grey or the roosters crowed. While it was yet dark, the music in the air flooded the earth. The people in their beds listened with rapture. "Praise God!" devoutly cried the surprised bishop. "It sounds like a choir of angels. Surely the cherubim and the seraphim are here. Now is fulfilled the promise of the psalmist. The players on instruments shall be there. So, from this beginning so mysterious to the rough, unwise, and stupid teachers, but by degrees clearer to the tactful ones who were kind and patient, the carillons spread over all the region between the forests of Ardennes and the island in the North Sea. The Netherlands became the land of melodious symphonies and of tinkling bells. No town, however poor, but in time had its carillon. Every quarter of an hour, the sweet music of hymn or song made the air vocal, while at the striking of the hours, the pious bowed their heads, and the workmen heard the call for rest, or they took cheer, because their day's toil was over. At sunrise, noon, or sunset, the Angelus, and at night the curfew sounded their calls. It grew into a fashion that, on stated days, great concerts were given, lasting over an hour, when the grand works of the masters of music were rendered, and famous carillon players came from all over the Netherlands to compete for prizes. The Low Countries became a famous school in which glockenspiele by scores were trained. Thus, no kingdom, however rich or great, ever equaled the land of the carillon in making the air sweet with both melody and harmony. Nobody ever sees a kabouter nowadays, for in the New World, when the woods are nearly all cut down, the world made by the steam engine and telegraph and wireless message, the automobile, airplane and submarine, cycle and undersea boat, the little folks in the mines and forests are forgotten. The chemists, miners, engineers, and learned men possess the secrets which were once those of the fairies only. Yet the artists and architects, the clockmakers and bell founders who love beauty, remember what their fathers once thought and believed. That is the reason why, on many a famous clock, either in front of the dial or near the pendulum, are figures of the gnomes who thought and the kabouters who wrought to make the carillons. In Teutonlands, where their cousins are named kobolds, and in France, where they are called fae, and in England brownies, they have tolling and ringing of bells, with peals, chimes, and cascades of sweet sound. But the Netherlands, still above all others on earth, is home to the carillon. And that is the end of the story. That was quite a sweet one. The tale of the making of many bells, deep in the mines and tuned to the singing voices of such lovely magical creatures, such as the kabouters. What a funny word that is. Now what's this? Giorno Giovanna, thank you for the follow. Oh, and thank you so much for the biddies. You're such a sweetheart. I appreciate it very much. Oh, and there's Sam. Hello, dear Samuel. I am most delighted to see you here again. I hope that you've had a most comfortable evening after however long a day. Oh, my darling, how are you if you're still around? And if not, then I hope you're having a soft rest somewhere out there. Oh, Bard. Bard's Stay Awake Challenge Impossible has been failed. Oh, sweetheart, I hope I didn't contribute too much to your soft falling asleep. As much as I would encourage it, I know that you need to stay awake. Come on, darling, I believe in you. You can do it. Oh, hello. Hello. I'm so happy to see you here as well. I know you're eating right now. Just wanted to pop in and say hello. Gotta go though. Have an amazing stream. Thank you so much for stopping by. I hope the world out there has been kind to you today. And if not, then I know I will. I cannot express how happy your stream makes me. Oh, Pulse. You are far too kind. I'm just here enjoying my time reading to all of my darlings. After all, that is exactly what Wednesdays are for. Some soft comfort. Now, I will drink some more water and then we will read our last story for tonight. Ooh. Hmm. Oh, yes, exactly. Thank you for the hydrate and for the stretch. Oh, yeah. Oh, goodness. Mm, mm, oof. And a posture check. I have to make sure not to slouch because my shoulders will be too tense and sore in the morning. Always have to straighten out so that my voice is nice and soft as well. Hmm. Now, if everyone is all warm and cozy still, I think we can head on to our last fairy tale for the evening, featuring the creaking of my chair. Or maybe I'll have just a little bit more water. How was your day before stream, by the way? Oh, um, eventful, as always. I am quite the busy person out there in the real world, so every day is just filled with tasks to the brim, almost overflowing. But I think today wasn't all that bad. I managed everything that I set out to do, which is usually the most important thing, isn't it? That days can seem so hard and overwhelming, but all we really must do is have something to achieve, even if it is something small. And once you've taken care of that, then you can say, my day has been successful. Hmm. Those criteria will always be different, day by day, person by person. And oftentimes I find myself giving mm, my poor dear me way too many things to juggle. It was busy, but you got your tasks done. I'm proud of you. Why, thank you, Pulse. I am quite happy with myself as well. After all, my favorite thing to do at the end of a long day is come here and be with you, all of my sweethearts. And for that, I have to work hard and make sure to plan appropriately because honestly, it is quite sad when I can't be here streaming. After all, this is where I have the most fun and feel the most at home. Oh, Bird, thank you for the head pat. I love them so much. Oh, oh, and maybe as a treat, have a soft kiss. Mm, that one's from me. But now, get cozy, everyone, okay? Because we're going to read our last story for tonight. This one is called The Woman with 366 Children. Long, long ago, before the oldest stork was young, and big deer and little fawns were very many in the Dutch forests, there was a pond famous for its fish, which lay in the very heart of Holland, with woods nearby. Hunters came with their bows and arrows to hunt the stags, or, out of the bright waters, boys and men in the sunshine drew out the fish with shining scales, or lured the trout with fly bait from their hiding places. In those days, the fish pond was called the Viver, and the woods where the deer ran, Rain's lair, or the deer's lair. So, because of the forests of oak and beech and alder trees were so fine, and game on land and in water so plentiful, the lord of the country came here and built his castle. He made a hedge around his estate, so that the people called the place the Count's Hedge, or as we say, the Hague. Even today, within this beautiful city, the forests, with their grand old trees, still remain, and the fish pond, called the Viver, is still yet there with its swans. On the little island, the fluffy, downy cygnets are born and grow to be big birds with long necks bent like an arch. In another part of the town also, with their trees for nesting and their pond for wading, are children of the same storks, whose feathers whose fathers and mothers lived there before America was discovered. By and by, many people of rank and fortune came to The Hague for its society. They built their grand houses at the slope of the hill not far away from the river, and in time the city grew up. It was a fine sight to see the lords and ladies riding out from the castle into the country. The cavalcade was very splendid when they went hawking. There were pretty women on horseback, and gentlemen in velvet clothes, with feathers in their hats, and the horses seemed proud to bear them. The falconers followed on foot, with the hunting birds perched on a hoop which the man inside the circle carried round him. Each falcon had on a little cap or hood, which was fastened over its head. When this was taken off, it flew high into the air on its hunt for the big and little birds which it brought down for its masters. There were also men with dogs, to beat the reeds and bushes and drive the smaller birds from shelter. The huntsmen were armed with spears, lest a wild boar or bear should rush out and attack them. It was always a merry day when the hawking party, in their fine clothes and joyful trappings, started out. There were huts as well as palaces, and poor people also at The Hague. Among these was a widow whose twin babies were left without anything to eat, for her husband and their father had been killed in the war. Having no money to buy a cradle, and her babies being too young to be left alone, she put the pair of little folks on her back and went out to beg. Now there was a fine lady, a countess, who lived with her husband, the count, near the VTUBER. She was childless and very jealous of other women who were mothers and had children playing around. On this day, when the beggar woman, with her two babies on her back, came along, the grand lady was in an unusually bad temper. For all her pretty clothes, she was not a person of fine manners. Indeed, she often acted more like a snarling dog, ready to snap at anyone who should speak to her. Although she had cradles and nurses and loved baby clothes, there was no baby. This spoiled her disposition, so that her husband and the servants could hardly live with her. One day after dinner, when there had been everything good to eat and drink on her table, and plenty of it, the countess went out to walk in front of her house. It was the 3rd day of January, but the weather was mild. The beggar woman, with her two babies on her back and their arms round her neck, crying with hunger, came trudging along. She went into the garden and asked the countess for food or any alms. She expected surely at least a slice of bread, a cup of milk, or a small coin. But the countess was rude to her and denied her both food and money. She even burst into a bad temper and reviled the woman for having 2 children instead of 1. When did you get those brats? They are not yours. You just brought them here to play on my feelings and excite my jealousy. Be gone. But the poor woman kept her temper. She begged piteously and said, "For the love of heaven, feed my babies, even if you will not feed me." "No, they are not yours. You're a cheat," said the fine lady, nursing her rage. "Indeed, madam, they are both my children, and born on one day. They have one father, but he is dead. He was killed in the war while serving his grace, your husband." "Don't tell me such a story," snapped back the countess, now in a fury. "I don't believe that anyone, man or woman, could have 2 children at once. Away with you." She seized the stick to drive off the poor woman. Now it was the turn of the beggar to answer back. Both had lost their temper, and the two angry women seemed more like she-bears robbed of their whelps. "Heaven punish you, you wicked, cruel, cold-hearted woman," cried the mother. Her two babies were almost choking her in their eagerness for food, yet their cries never moved the rich lady, who had bread and good things to spare, while their poor parent had not a drop of milk to give them. The countess now called her men servants to drive the beggar away. This they did most brutally. They pushed the poor woman outside the garden gate and closed it behind her. As she turned away, the poor mother, taking each of her children by its back, one in each hand, held them up before the grand lady and cried out loudly, so that all hear her, "May you have as many children as there are days in the year." Now, with all her wrath burning in her breast, what the beggar woman really meant was this: it was the 3rd of January, and so there were but 3 days in the year so far. She intended to say that, instead of having to care for 2 children, the countess might have the trouble of rearing 3, and all born on the same day. But the fine lady, in her mansion, cared nothing for the beggar woman's words. Why should she? She had her lordly husband, who was a count, and he owned thousands of acres. Besides, she possessed vast riches. In her great house were 10 men-servants and 31 maid-servants, together with her rich furniture and fine clothes and jewels. The lofty brick church, to which she went on Sundays, was hung with the coats of arms of her famous ancestors. The stone floor, with its great slabs, was so grandly carved with the crests and heraldry of her family that to walk over these was like climbing a mountain or tramping across a ploughed field. Common folks had to be careful lest they should stumble over the bosses and knobs of the carved tombs. A long train of her servants and tenants on the farms followed her when she went to worship. Inside the church, the lord and lady sat in high seats on velvet cushions and under a canopy. By the time summer had come, according to the fashion in all good Dutch families, all sorts of pretty baby clothes were made ready. There were soft, warm, swaddling bands, tiny socks, and long white linen dresses. A baptismal blanket, covered with silk, was made for the christening, and daintily embroidered. Plenty of lace, and pink and blue ribbons were kept at hand. And because there might be twins, a double set of garments was provided, besides baby bathtubs and all sorts of nice things for the little stranger or strangers to come. Even the names were chosen. Would it be Wilhelm or Wilhelmina? It was real fun to think over the names, but it was hard to choose out of so many. At last, the countess crossed off all but 46, nearly every girl's name ending in y, as in our Polly or Sally. But before the sun set on the expected day, it was neither one boy, nor one girl, nor both, nor were all the 46 names chosen sufficient, for the beggar woman's wish had come true in a way not expected. There were as many as, and no fewer children than there were days in the year, and since this was a leap year, there were 366 little folks in the house, so that other names, besides the 46, had to be used. Yet none of these wee creatures was bigger than a mouse. Beginning at daylight, one after another appeared, first a girl and then a boy, so that after the 48th, the nurse was at her wits' end to give them names. It was not possible to keep the little babies apart. The 31 servant maids of the mansion were all called in to help in sorting out the girls and the boys, but soon it seemed hopeless to try to pick out Peter from Henry or Catalina from Antje. After an hour or two spent at the task, and others coming along, the women found that it was useless to try any longer. It was found that little Piet, Jan and Klaas, Hank, Dove and Japik among the boys, and Molly, Micah, Lena, Elsia, Antje, and Marie were getting all mixed up, so they gave up attempt in despair. Besides, the supply of ribbons had given out long before, after the first dozen or so were born. As for the baby clothes made ready, they were of no use, for all the garments were too big. In one of the long dresses, tied up like a bag, one might possibly, with stuffing, have put the whole family of 366 siblings. It was not likely such small fry of human beings could live long. So the good Bishop Guy of Utrecht, when he heard that the beggar woman's curse had come true in so unexpected a manner, ordered that the babies should all be baptized at once. The Count, who was strict in his ideas of both custom and law, insisted on it too. So nothing would do but to carry the tiny infants to church. How to get them there was a question. The whole house had been rummaged to provide things to carry the little folks in, but the supply of trays and mince pie dishes and crocks was exhausted at the 360th baby. So there was left only a Turk's head, or round glazed earthen dish, fluted and curved, which looked like the turban of a Turk, hence its name. Into this, the last batch of babies, or extra 6 girls, were stowed. Curiously enough, number 366 was an inch taller than the others. To 30 housemaids was given a tray, for each was to carry 12 mannikins, and one the last 6. Instead of rich silk blankets, a wooden tray, and no clothes on, must suffice. In the great church, the bishop was waiting with his assistants, holding brass basins full of holy water. All the town, including the dogs, were out to see what was going on. Many boys and girls climbed up on the roofs for the one-story houses, or in the trees to get a better view of the curious procession, the like of which had never been seen in The Hague before. Neither has anything like it ever been seen since. So the parade began. First when the Count, with his captains and the trumpeters, blowing their trumpets. These were followed by the men servants, all dressed in their best Sunday clothes, who had the crest and arms of their master the Count on their backs and breasts. Then came on the company of 31 maids, each one carrying a tray, on which were 12 mannikins. 20 of these trays were round and made of wood, lined with velvet, smooth and soft, but 10 were of earthenware, oblong in shape, like a manger. In these, every year, were baked the Christmas pies. At first, all went on finely, for the outdoor air seemed to put the babies asleep, and there was no crying. But no sooner were they inside the church then about 200 of the brats began wailing and whimpering. Pretty soon they set up such a squall that the count felt ashamed of his progeny, and the bishop looked very unhappy. To make matters worse, one of the maids, although warned of the danger, stumbled over the helmet of an old crusader carved in stone, and rose some 6 inches or so above the floor. In a moment she fell and lay sprawling, spilling out at least a dozen babies. "Holy Mary!" she cried as she rolled over. "Have I hurt them?" Happily, the wee ones were thrown against the long trained gown of an old lady walking directly in front of her, so that they were unhurt. They were easily picked up and laid on the tray again, and once more the line started. Happily, the bishop had been notified that he would not have to call out the names of all the infants, that is 366, for this would have kept him at the solemn business all day long. It had been arranged that, instead of any on the list of the chosen 46 to be so named, all the boys should be called John, and all the girls Elizabeth, or in Dutch, Jan and Lisbeth. Yet, even to say John 180 times and Lisbeth 186 times nearly tired the old gentleman to death. So after the first 6 trays full of wee folks had been sprinkled one at a time, the bishop decided to asperse them, that is, shake from a mop or brush the holy water on a tray full of babies at one time. So he called for the aspersorium. Then, clipping this in the basin of holy water, he scattered the drops over the wee folk until all, even the 6 extra girl babies, were sprinkled. Probably because the bishop thought oh, Probably because the bishop thought a Turk was next doors, he dropped more water than usual on these last 6 until the young ones squealed with the cold. It was noted, on the contrary, that the little folks in the mince pie dishes were gently handled, as if the good man had visions of Christmas coming and the good things on the table. Yet it was evident that such tiny people could not bear what healthy babies of full size would think nothing of. Whether it was because of the damp weather, or the cold air in the brick church, or too much or excitement, or because there were not 366 nurses or milk bottles ready, it came to pass that every one of these wee creatures died when the sun went down. Just where they were buried is not told, but for hundreds of years there was, in one of the Hague churches, a monument in honor of these little folks who lived but a day. It was graven with portraits in the stone of the count and countess, and told of their children, as many as the days of the year. Nearby were hung up the 2 basins in which the holy water used by the bishop in sprinkling the babies was held. The year, month, and day of the wonderful event were also engraved. Many and many people from various lands came to visit the tomb. The guidebook spoke of it, and tender women wept as they thought how 366 little cradles in the Count's castle would have looked had each baby lived. And that is the end of our last story today. Oh, well, hello, and welcome, Joko736. Happy to see you. We're just having a chill little reading stream. where I go through a couple of stories in one evening. And actually, that was the last one for tonight. Oh, my darlings, I hope all of you were able to enjoy yourself. Have a most pleasant and comfy time. And perhaps some of you might have even fallen asleep. Hmm. Now, I know that I had a most wonderful time. Oh, there I am. And I know that I already look forward to our next reading stream because it is always such a pleasure to be here with you, my darlings. Hmm. Thank you for the wonderful stream. Thank you for being here, Bard. I'm back. I had to walk my dogs. Of course, Pulse, welcome back. We're just about to give it a soft ending here. Thank you for the stream, Amber. Thank you for stopping by, Docky. I was very happy to see everyone here today. Well, and to end our wonderful evening together, I think we can go over and raid Yuna, who is quite a lovely streamer and seems to be enjoying a good old um game of Apex. Now, if you would like to have a raid message, I think tonight we can go with a gentle mommy raid. Why not? Oh, thank you for the stream, Amber. You were lovely. Thank you so much, Rito, for being here. Oh, I have to say, it's been a lovely evening here with everyone. So, that's it for the story time, my darlings. We'll see each other on Friday and then again on Saturday. So, until then, I hope the days will be kind with you. And remember, my eternal light will be with you always.